Hello. Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction and thanks for inviting me. Can you all hear me? Okay, if at any point you can't hear me or something happens, just jump in and yell and let me know. I'm going to spend the talk, a bit of time in the talk, talking about the background of my projects in terms of the research and kind of tell a long narrative of what has gone into the projects and how they came about. So I'm going to share my screen and talk along with my slides. Hopefully that's okay. I'll just leave it in this mode so I can see where I am. And I'll just start now. Okay, so I kind of have this very long trajectory to explain that started in 2009, so over 10 years ago. I started working in an artist type of residency for a year at the Object Recognition Lab of Dr. Dennis Pelly at NYU, who's a neuroscientist and a psychologist studying vision science. And he works with a lot of artists, visual artists, because of the way that artists work with their eyes so much, especially visual artists, to see if there's any kind of way to understand the visual system in a way that scientists might miss, or to find certain places where artists have honed in on a type of phenomena. So, for example, he worked with Chuck Close and the way that perception, the way you can still perceive a human face, even though there is no part of the face actually represented other than these, blobs. And so looking at this is part of the research. So I started off with a facial recognition project. How do humans recognize faces, and what is the threshold of the limit point that we need in order to recognize the category of a face? And just going into the lab and drawing faces and parts of faces until I could get it down to the least amount of lines necessary to still see an impression of a face. So as I was drawing, I was trying to get just a few strokes to see what kind of things are necessary. And eventually, depending on which lines I did, it seemed that I could get it down to 3 marks, and that I needed a sort of either an eye or a part of a nose or something that was close by spatially, 3 parts spatially close by to each other in order for the face impression to appear. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One is because after you look at so many images of faces, you're kind of primed to see a face in many things. But then also, we have a particular part of our brain called the fusiform gyrus, which is a specialist object recognition area that is for faces, other human faces, versus a general object recognition category of the broader category of something like a face or a car or a bottle. The fusiform gyrus focuses specifically on facial recognition. So from the facial recognition project where I was trying to get it down to minimal lines, I started to do, to broaden that, there was the spatial relation of the face. And I started to draw things that were all kinds of objects in my peripheral vision. And so in the vision lab and in the neuroscience, it's useful to use peripheral vision because this is where vision breaks down, and the areas where there are kind of like glitches for our vision and where things become blurry and where we no longer recognize things is a very fruitful place to explore because it indicates something going on in the brain or in the mind of the recognition process. So all of the drawings that I did, I strapped my face into this head rest that would limit the motion of my head, and then also, try to just look forward and draw the things in my peripheral vision and kind of capture some of the images that I saw without looking at the objects to see how is the object being broken down into different things in the peripheral vision. And I did this over the course of a year. not really knowing what this would lead to in terms of science. I was the like artist doing this. But then as I was doing it, because I was looking so much in my peripheral vision, I came up with a hypothesis that there is a spatial effect of a kind of at the time I called it a gravitational effect, that different sized objects placed next to each other would affect the perception of the size of the object next to it. And that there was a kind of gravitational lensing effect or pooling effect. We could no longer tell how big an object was. And this is from my observation of drawing. So working with the scientists in the lab and the postdoc, we came up with an experiment and had participants come in and tested it out on a screen where people looked at different sized objects in their peripheral vision and tried to estimate the size. And it actually surprisingly turned into an experiment with positive results. And so the hypothesis was not wrong. And the graph is here, which I know, I'm sorry, I'm like explaining a science project right now, but I promise you it will relate. But there is a clear differentiation between how close an object is spatially to how well participants did to identify or estimate the size of it. So this is really exciting. I presented it at a neuroscience conference, which was terrifying because I'm not a scientist, but it was something that I then never really let go of, and I've been thinking about it ever since. So cut to 8 years later, and I started to become interested in machine vision recognition and machine learning, and how do machines recognize objects? And is there anything that I can relate between these two phenomena? So of course, I was also interested in the politics and social implications of machine learning. So I saw this quote from Mark Zuckerberg that says, "It's easier for AI to detect nipples than hate speech." And I was like, oh, really, Mark Zuckerberg, is that true? So let's see why you say so. And I thought this was an interesting statement, considering I had seen so many things that were flagged as nipples incorrectly as false positives on Instagram and Tumblr and other places, and Facebook, and flagged for removal, or accounts were locked because of it. And so clearly it's not that easy to identify a nipple. There's a lot that goes into it. And hate speech is a really different category. So I went into a long sort of rabbit hole playing with different platforms, use of image recognition, and I looked at Google Vision's API and their recognition system, which is proprietary, so you can't actually understand what is happening. So I just was playing around with the images of myself, and they have an object recognition category, and then they have a label category that labels an image as either adult or racy or violent. And when I did a picture of myself, it returned the racy label as likely, which I was interested in. And then, something like avocado toast did not return anything. So over the course of a couple months, or a few months, I kept playing with it, and I was changing my hair color. I had different clothes. I did different sort of poses and affectation. And I always had this like triggering of this racy label, whatever that means. And then I even tried covering my face in different ways. And I began to notice that how robust the system is, that even when you cover things up or try to hide, it really only needs a few features to put a label on, and it would, in the category label, still label as a face. And so I thought this was interesting, because when I was drawing the faces, humans also need very little features to recognize a face. So I was then comparing two different images of me versus other people, trying to emulate some of their motions. and style. So I wear a hat and glasses, and it didn't do much. And then I just got public images of different people. I noticed that female presenting persons tended to trigger the racy label or adult content label more than male presenting persons. And I just was looking at things like age and race, and how across the board, the female presenting persons triggered the racy label. So then I started to play around with it to see what I needed to do to push it to no longer do it. And I had to push it quite far. I put my face upside down, cut it out, really kind of sloppy with Photoshop. But then what really worked the most was when I did 3D extractions of my face. It didn't label my face as a human face anymore, and it also never labeled it as adult or racy. So in a exhibition, I put all of the data sets of the things that subverted the Google API onto separate jump drives, and I put them in glass test tubes in a case and have them offline in case, it's a kind of in case of a future emergency where you have to intervene into a machine recognition system, where there's no longer any kind of data set saved that has this information of what has subverted it in the past. Just kind of keep an archive of this and keep it safe from sort of tampering. And on the side of this, I had this sort of 3D space with all of the images laid out, so that in this kind of office space, so that you could pick up this device and it would explain what was on those jump drives, because you couldn't see what it was. And so you just kind of went through the archive of the images that were on the jump drives. And that was a piece called Woman with a Google API. And what I'm working on now is something called Xenovision, or a convolutional parabiology. And it is stemming from this idea of the 3D extracted model as a space to rethink machine vision and train it differently. If it is currently causing an issue and subverting the system that it uses to classify and label objects, which is clearly a biased system, maybe going back to the 3D model can offer a place of intervention, but also open up a space to think about a different type of peripheral vision for the machine, something that is not human-based, and something that is going to rethink how we are seen by the machine. But also, there is an issue with the model of the algorithm still being based on our own neural convolutional network. So in machine learning science right now, there's Vincent Ordonez, he works with machine learning, and published an article about how the machine learning software that's trained on data sets doesn't just mirror or mimic human biases, but it amplifies them. And they know that bias appears in the system, but they don't know why it amplifies, why it's amplified in the machine learning process. That's currently still unknown. And so with my Xenovision project, I go back to think about the convolutional neural net and how it's structured, and how there may be a form of machine bias that is produced from either a lack of a spatial analysis, or from having a different spatial effect that happens from the image that it is learning on. So this is an example of the neuronal structure on a cat eyeball, and it's based on research from Hubel and Wiesel. They won the Nobel Prize in 1981 for the physiology of the retina, and they had taken a cat and mapped out each of the neurons on the retina and saw that each neuron on the retina was reserved for a particular angle of light or orientation, and that there's a convolutional pooling that happens. So this is the low-level retinal neurons, each one's for each orientation, and then there's a pooling effect, and each of these goes to one, and then pooling, and then this is a higher level recognition area eventually. And this is that structure of the cat neuron is very similar to the human retina, and that process of convolution, which is, if you look at the way that a convolutional neural net is structured algorithmically, very similar. And we did not have this model until the neuroscience model appeared to kind of understand. I mean, there was a separate sort of mathematical history that developed this as well. So, but that's another story. So anyways, this to me was interesting as thinking about this kind of parabiology, that we've modeled the retina of a cat eyeball and human eyeballs, which is a biological, physiological system, but we give it the images that we see, and then we don't understand why it produces a different form of bias, but has a similar kind of thing. So it's sort of like this mutated version of biological vision, which is why I call it a parabiology. It's like not really a biology, but heavily modeled on biology. And so this project was sort of also a hypothesis where I took the 3D extractions of my face and used that with a machine learning transfer, a transfer learning algorithm that is a generative adversarial network, had already been trained, but then gave it my 3D face models to produce images in the hope that it would not produce a human-like face because of the intervention and the issue of there not being an association between that 3D spatial object and the human face. And it produced these really alien-like results, which is what I wanted. And of course, a lot of machine learning does produce these strange effects, but I was surprised at how specifically alien looking and cool they looked. So I started to, I'm collecting these and now creating a space, this is a work in progress right now. It's something that I'm building out in a 3D space for gathering all of the 3D image objects. And these are kind of placeholders right now, because I'm having, I have different people that I got from Fiverr to interpret the images and create 3D models. So each one is going to contribute an interpretation of these faces, and we'll have an archive in the end of all of the interpretations of the alien faces from the machine learning model. Okay, so that is the Xenovision project, which is underway. And it relates to my other project, which also has a few iterations, Data Slime, that I will connect to. So again, I've been interested in this 3D model versus image, and thinking about the ontology of a 3D model versus a scan in this project. So what's the difference between a 3D model and a 3D scan and a photograph, which is a question that came from how does the machine learning algorithm differentiate it? And this is a piece that where it started, it was a triptych video piece. I'm sorry, I thought I embedded the videos, but it didn't. On one side, it is a mashup of nipples that were misrecognized as objects, photographs that were misrecognized by the machine learning algorithms as nipples and other things, like a lot of desserts. And then on the right side is just this kind of streaming loop of my data scrolling, which is the data that of all my Google image search data that I downloaded from 2006 to 2018. Like every Google, I had never turned off my data tracking. So when you download your data, it gives you every Google image search that you have done. And so I just took all the HTML files that has all the links, and that just kind of like scrolls in this pattern endlessly next to it. Because the question is about where is the ontology of the object, especially thinking about the 3D object. Where does that fit in between the data ontology and the photograph and the scanned object? So the 3D model, you know, if you model with a modeling program, or if you model with by coding it, it never has an indexical point in reality like a photograph does, like this, you know, thing of pointing to something in the world and making an impression. But the 3D scan does have an indexical object that it points to. So this is me that I scanned. It's infrared information that creates a 3D mesh. And then on the back end, both of these look the same because they're both 3D meshes. This image is from a model on TurboSquid that's for sale for $950, and she's very anatomically correct, and it's for VR porn. And it interests me because like you can go through like every part of her vagina and butthole and like boobs, and it's not censored in any way. It's not a photograph of a real person, but it's for sale. And then the like photograph of you know, the cupcake is seen as a nipple but banned. And so there's sort of this strange relationship on the level of the machine recognition seeing something or not seeing something. And I was curious about, well, what is the 3D scan? You know, where does this fall in there? So this piece, Data Slime, is based on that exploration. And it starts off, I'm just building this sort of swamp of all of these things where there is I don't know, I think of it as a swamp or like a sliming of all these kinds of data for 3D model forms, because they're similar in structure data-wise, but they're very different in their origin. And so like a scan of my arm is in this swamp. And also this is a 3D model of a head that's produced from a JavaScript 3JS piece of code that then produces a human-like head, but is never, you know, it's not related to a scan. And then these pointy, different colored objects are all things that I made from my Facebook posts. Each one is a different year. The comments that I made on Facebook, and the object is bigger and pointier the more, if I made more comments that year. And I took the timestamp data from all of the comments to create the points that triangulate. You know, all 3D models are made out of triangles. So each point from the timestamp, like the time and the date, creates the triangle that's triangulated. And then I just was like, what shape is that going to create? It just puts all the triangles together and you know, just makes this kind of messy object. But for me, these are like 3 different ontologies of a 3D model that I was trying to play around with as like a space to think about where maybe something is different on the machine end of side than the human side. And this is my face in here, which I think is one of the strangest things about 3D scans, is that it's sort of like a photograph, but nothing like a photograph. And that's important for machine recognition. So I just have a few more slides. The way that I presented it was I did a 3D prints of my 3D scanned hands and had the piece in different cellular objects. I can't think of the word, but mobile phones, cellular objects, and had it so that you don't navigate through the piece. It's the 3D. Oh, let's turn the sound off. The sound's not important. You don't navigate through the piece. The 3D hands float in the air with the piece loaded on it, and they navigate through the data swamp. So it's meant to be like the objects are all experiencing themselves, or it's an immersive experience, but not for humans. It's for all of the human like data that is interacting without us and doing a kind of meditative exploration of like human-based material, and that just endlessly moves around in a loop. And then I have been continuing to update it and add in different things. And the next piece was for the web, in a web VR space. And so I took the Facebook, my comments, and used the recurrent neural network to train it on my comments in order to make its own comments. Where's the video? And I'm just gonna show the trailer because my computer is getting really hot. And if I don't want it to crash if I open up the VR. I don't have enough memory on my computer. So, okay, yeah, this is just, oh, it was playing already. Yeah, it's going slow. My computer's got too many things. Let's see. Oh, it's Vimeo. It should work. What's happening? I have to minimize the Zoom window because it makes me can't see. Okay. Okay. This is the last piece of the last slide of the presentation. This is the current state of the piece. Why doesn't that let me full screen? Well, it won't let me full screen. So, yeah, so it's something that I'm continuing to build out, and it's supposed to feel like the surreal landscape where you don't know where there is an AI, but it's somewhere lurking, and you can read the messages that it leaves and go through this sort of I kind of think of it as this like flooded sculpture garden, like a civilization that used to be but no longer exists, and you can only kind of see the remnants of it. But you know, there's always like, you see these ruins in cities where like plants are overgrowing and taking back the city, and like to me this like the AI is taking over and like using the human remnants to like reclaim this sort of like sculptural space that used to be human and now maybe is not so human anymore, but still attached to the human. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Yvette. That was so interesting. Let's open the discussion up for any questions from the participants, comments. Any questions?
I have a quick question. What type of messages would you receive in that from the AI in that landscape? It was kind of hard to see what they said, but
Yeah. So let me pull it up because I forgot. But yeah, they're based on my writing, which is already weird, and so they're weird because I write weird things. Uh, but yeah, I
are
think
they
I
based on research writings or,
no, they're based on my Facebook post, but my Facebook posts are often weird anyway. So let me see if I have an example. Yeah, oh yeah, I forget about that part. About okay, so yeah, here's a comment. Um, you're talking about factories dismantling. It's because it's really quantum DNA. There are systems alien writing a Google data Earth, an established journal, a formalism similar to a front end of the dead. Here, I'll put that in the chat.
Thank you. So what are the responses when you put those messages out there either on Facebook or through this project?
Um, the responses from like people on Facebook.
Yeah, if they are responding to your strange text, as you called it.
Well, I mean, I think that's just I just write weird things. There are people that I'm friends with know that about me. It's not for the project. I wasn't writing weird things for the project. I just was using what I had written over the years, and I just happened to have a lot of things in my feed that are conducive for making more weird posts, I guess.
I think it's amazing how you, thank you for answering that. I think it's amazing how you took the time to really walk us through your thought process through the whole project as well. I think one thing I wanted to ask about the racy label is, did you also figure out exactly what those features are that are needed for the software to recognize something as racy, or was it just kind of hard to do so?
Well, it was hard to do because I also felt that Google was it was learning over time, and so at first it was really robust, and then now when I do it, it doesn't do it as much. So I think they also became aware of the like gendered bias and the different kind of bias. There was a lot of complaints about it, and so I think that they've done something. So it's really hard to tell because they don't they don't tell you what they're actually doing, and they don't know also. But yeah, it's hard. It's changing all the time.
Yeah, there was recently a article about the biases of coding, and I've always thought about this as well too. I was even just searching. A friend of mine was getting married. She happens to be Jamaican, and we were looking for updos for a wedding, and we're Google image searching, and every single image that came up was a blonde woman with blue eyes with an updo. So we definitely got into the bias of that. And recently this article was posted about, about the biases that are basically for white men inherent in the systems. I'll put the link over here for you too, but you know, obviously you've encountered that as well in your research too.
Yeah, and I would definitely say there was a very strong racial element to that. It was so many adult category that was coming back, not just the racy category, and a lot of things that but it's hard to tell because they're just changing it all the time.
Thank you so much for sharing everything. I'm excited to see where that project goes. Can anyone enter into that space other than you at this point in your final project that you were working on?
Oh, can anyone like experience it?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the data slime one was, yeah, that one's been out. You know, I put them out. It was on the part of the wrong biennial online. I kind of I have to always sort of check on it and update it, but also add things to it. And then the Xenovision one's not up yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yvette, like this was really, yeah, exciting to me. The one inspiration that I took from it, I was wondering, because I liked how you created this defense in the little bottle, or like laboratory glass that you could like pull out in case you need to. And then you mentioned later this, you know, using this generative adversarial network. I just had to look it up, but then it kind of gave me the thought around like, what would it mean to have your defense AI, right? To hack,
Yeah.
right? To basically change your data. You know, I mean, it's manipulation, but for the good.
Yeah, you mean like the idea of the adversarial
You could
network.
basically like identify the biases, right? And then for whoever has that condition to be biased, right? You know, create the necessary data, you know, filter to hack the AI, which also disinforms the Google AI from further learning, right? Which makes it incredibly complex, right? Because it becomes that echo, like this, there's probably resonance in that. I'm just
Yeah.
so underwhelmed by AI being still working like a frequentist model where you eventually have these biases towards the average. I mean, this is what I really read into that, which is like, I mean, you don't need a machine learning model to do that in a way. But anyway, now I'm getting into data stuff, but thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
That was fun.
Hi, Yvette. So that was really cool. Thank you so much for sharing. One thing that I found quite poetic in like, you know, your description of especially the installation where you've got these two hands that are sort of like looking at each other, and you said it's the object recognizing itself, and you know, it reminded me of this thing. So I've been kind of talking to this archaeologist whose research is looking at like the kind of knives, the hand axes that were being made in the sort of, well, in the late Stone Age in like in the Deccan in India. And the anyway, his thesis basically says that, like, you know, these tools that people were making, they were like completely symmetrical, like, you know, teardrop shape. And like it, I mean, anyway, there was this like strange kind of resonance with what you said, because he's like that was kind of like the, I mean, this is his argument, that like that was the birth of cognition, when people were making these perfectly symmetrical kind of tools and just getting them right. So uh, you know, you have at the whatever birth of cognition, like when that spark starts, supposedly you've got this recognition of you know, the human and object, and here you have the object recognizing itself. And I thought, like, if you could kind of elaborate on that more. And I just have another follow up to that. The text that you shared is really cool. Can you give us a little context, or is that it? Because that's also really awesome. Like, you know, is it just like this strange kind of sci-fi haiku, or was there context to it?
That's one of the things in the last version
Okay.
of the project. So I had it learn from my writing to write posts, and that's one of the things that that it wrote.
Okay.
So not all of them. So here's another one, because it's taking from my post. So here's another one. It's not as interesting. So it's it's learning from my writing, and because I write, I can see some of the words that it's using that are my words from things that I've written, but it rearranges them in this very interesting way that I'm like, I see why it's doing that based on what I've written, but it's a completely new idea that really fascinates me. So it kind of inspires me with ideas, even though I see my words in there, sort of, it's something different. So let's see.
And like, does it have a word count, like a daily word count that it would do or something like that?
No, I just run it manually. I should make it so that it just does it. I just,
Okay.
yeah,
But
I
like,
haven't,
have you run it for like a day or something like that? Like, and
have I what?
have you run it for like an extended period of time, like say a day or something?
Just like, yeah, like a few hours.
Okay.
I have still the language processing recurrent neural networks is not, I just borrowed someone's code and used it because I'm not an expert with any of the language recurrent networks, so I just use the ones that are trained and then use the words that I have to give it to it. But yeah, I would like the name of the archaeologists or the archaeology that you said, because that's really fascinating.
So I can share his paper on the group if more people are also interested. It's quite an interesting paper, especially like, kind of looking at stuff that we've all been thinking about, but like from this like completely, I mean, I don't know, like he's kind of coming at it from the point of view of history, and like it's a fun read, honestly. Like, I'll share that paper with you. His name's Andre Baptista. So he's based in Bombay, and yeah, I'll share it on the group.
That sounds
Yeah?
good. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. That was really cool.
Yeah, thanks.
So Yvette, I'd like to say thank you for taking on this sort of wild trip from your neuroscience investigation to your surreal landscapes. We were all sort of hanging on, I think, like sort of like, whoa, going from that place. And the activist in me has a question about, so understanding some of what you understand now, what do we send to the facial recognition engineers at Google, to be mindful of, or, do we hack, ask, or say, I see you? That's kind of that's a hall of mirrors, so like, I see you, see me. And then the Cindy Sherman-esque beauty of you putting your face in all different places and talking about the human body as support, like for the devices, the human body becomes the sculpture that holds the devices. Fabulous, 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 fabulous. And then the last thing, this is sort of a comment question, is that remnants. Now, this is something that I have fallen in love with you for right this minute, is remnants. Remnants of a civilization. That's it. There's an it there, because just today I was thinking about Pompeii. I was driving in the car thinking about Pompeii, thinking about were there people that sort of survived Pompeii, and like what happened? And okay, so when you said remnants, I thought, shit, wow, what do we do with that? That is a new metaphor, a new narrative. Remnants that it's alive, it's not dead, it's not past. So I don't really know if I asked you questions or up, but thank you. And all of these things you stimulated for me, which is great.
Wow, thank you so much. That is fantastic. Yeah, so I mean, about the question of the activists. side of things, you know, I think as I was working on this project, there are a lot of places, research societies like Data and Society, who are dedicated to kind of raising the issues for policy and raising these things for direct kind of communication with those groups that are, I mean, I don't know if they send things to Google, but Kate Crawford, for example, working with Trevor Paglin recently with the, I don't know if you saw the roulette, it's like ImageNet roulette, where you put in your face and it categorizes you, and they reveal the bias, you know, a lot of the bias that is in the image recognition from training on the data sets. That ImageNet is a big data set that everyone uses. So I felt that there was a lot of people working on the fact that there's bias, but I was trying to explore more I felt that everyone was saying that it was because of this semantic web of the ImageNet that we've labeled these things already, and it's learning that. But I think that there's something else also going on, which is part of why they don't understand why it amplifies. So I was trying to kind of intervene into like, well, maybe visually there's something else also happening, but we haven't articulated it yet. There's more there for us to dig into. It's not solved just by solving the data set. That's just one thing. So yeah, I mean, I also think I think about the idea of bias, and think about the way that that applies to a machine or not, and what is perhaps just an effect of the structure. Like, it's also a remnant because it's missing a spatial experience, and so it has a flat ontology. No, that's not the phrase I want to use. It has a flatness. It's missing something. There's a remnant of the biological physiology modeled, and what is the effect that missing thing is doing? What's that gap doing? So, you know, these are all questions that aren't answered, but that I dig into to explore, and then the works kind of become artifacts of those questions. And
I would invite you to write an article called "Missing the Spatial Experience." So, I think there's something there that's really, really powerful. Whoa. Yeah, great.
Thank you. Taking notes.
Thank you, Yvette, and thank you everybody for your questions. That was amazing.